interviewing a very special person in many ways. His name happens to be Chris Dennis, my truly friend. Yes, so let's get started immediately. Hello. Is there any unusual things about you? No. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm British. Did you know I'm British? I'm British. Aren't they beautiful? Yes, they are. I know. They're beautiful. Let's see, do you have any talents, Chris? I do have talents. What are they? Could you show us some? I have musical talents. I can sing. Let's see that. That's before my hit single. These people try to fade me. We will see you next time on the interviewing show.
Like I said, obviously a very fun and goofy side, but I think the thing that I will always remember him for is his connection to nature and his love of the natural world, and his ability to just get up and go. He was always like adventuring, he was always going somewhere, he was always using the camera as a way to engage with the rest of the world. And so I'm really happy to be here at the lake. I feel very close to him every time I go swimming, I think about him. And yeah, I miss him a lot. But sort of funny stories about being out in the world as well. We went on this Winnebago trip, and every time we stopped anywhere, all of us would sleep inside the Winnebago to keep warm. And Chris would always sleep on the roof. He refused to sleep inside the Winnebago. He wanted to be close to the stars and out in the world. And so we have a little compilation of clips that identify some of that. Some of it wasn't documented, like the composting toilet that he built in his backyard in Cayuga Heights. And even in the dead of winter would go out into the freezing cold to poop in this composting toilet, which was actually quite ahead of its time. Will's mother is now researching economies at Cornell and getting a lot of acclaim for it. But a lot of these ideas really started with Chris about caring for the planet and the world itself.
We are at the banks of the great St. Lawrence River, and boy, am I ready to fight! I'm lying here by the river. It's so good to be under the stars. There's nothing I could really ask for. Except for more babbling brooks.
Ow! 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 Ow!
This is my day one campsite. It rained extensively last night and most of my stuff is wet. But I will continue trekking.
Okay, this is kind of like a waste of tape.
The beautiful scene of an Adirondack lake. It's gorgeous, tranquil. There's nothing quite like it.
Holy shit!
Hey, Chris here. Just checking in.
Been on the side of this highway for a couple days now, but you know what? It's all good. Radiator fluid is draining from our car into the swamps, down into the environment, gonna kill some nice fish. And you know what? It's okay, because I'm not a pescatarian. Do you know what a pescatarian is? Peter doesn't even know what a pescatarian is. Hi, we're here today in South Dakota at the America's Destination. What's that, you ask? The Corn Palace. What's the Corn Palace? It's a palace made of corn. Come on. Now, you should know that 1/7 of the American farmland is corn. So, if 1/7 of American farmland is corn, that's a false statistic. I actually said it wrong. 1/7 of American land is dedicated to growing corn. Isn't that fascinating? Yes. Our #1 export, corn. #1 cattle crop, corn. #1 sugar, corn syrup. Come on, let's go.
So we just had a lot of fun looking through this footage that Dan Fung had compiled, and I think, it's pretty fragmentary. It's these little moments, I don't know that all, what it all amounts to, but we were just wanting to think of what to share here. And I think one of the things that I kind of recognized was a growth. And I think we see that from this being a little kid. And that last version was sort of the first glimpses also into Chris sort of, this video that you saw was all before YouTube. There was no purpose to it except for just to goof off, and it was all just for ourselves, for fun, and there was no one going to see it. And this was the summer between high school and college, that last clip there. And so I think it's an interesting little moment because it's kind of the first seeds of Chris's burgeoning sort of social awareness. And so we're goofing off, we're performing and having fun, but it's also he's thinking about bigger things, and I think it's sort of interesting to track that. And then not 6 months later, during the first semester of university, was another really big pivotal moment for him, for me, for a number of us. It was freshman year, and the 2010 earthquake in Haiti happened, and we sort of put together this ramshackle group to go to Haiti to do these fundraising videos, and we, I think it was an inflection point in trying to kind of turn from goofing off with the cameras pointed at ourselves for fun to also thinking about how we could be people in the world. And the camera was actually this interesting tool for him and for many of us, speaking for myself. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm making documentaries to this day, and I credit Chris with that completely. And so I just want to play 40 seconds at the beginning of this, kind of fundraiser video that we made in Haiti. Watching it back, a lot of it doesn't quite hold up, and it's sort of cringy and embarrassing, but it was a really important turning point for us. And so I just wanted to play that next.
Most of the devastation from the recent earthquake in Haiti came as a result of poverty, not just plate tectonics. At the beginning of the 20th century, Haiti was at its peak of prosperity. But after a century of international economic exploitation, totalitarian dictatorships, and unchecked deforestation, Haiti is now the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. On January 12th came the knockout punch.
So I think a lot about that time in our lives, and one story in particular I just wanted to share in the interest of sort of storytelling, and then I would love to hear from other people. But there was a naivete to what we were doing there in the first place, but at the same time there was a curiosity and I think an interest in engaging with the world and its complexity and pain and everything. And so one of the stories that I still think about a lot was we were going out and making these fundraising videos for like little NGO, like little community groups, nonprofits, and to come back to where we were kind of camping out, there was this one road the was going to take, and there was a roundabout, and there was a traffic jam, and I actually wasn't there for this, but because we were in two little teams. But one night coming back from filming, there was an aid truck and there was a traffic jam, and someone had tried to take like a bag of food off of this aid truck, and a police officer had shot him and killed him. And this guy, it caused a big scene. Everyone came, and Chris jumped out of the car, happened to see it, took some photos, and then we talked about it a lot, and we were trying to figure out what this, we were here to help, what we were trying to do, and then the next day we went out schedule, we did some more filming, coming back, and in that same place there was a pile of tires on fire, and asked people, and causing another traffic jam, and asking people what that meant. And it was, the guy who had been shot was a gang member from one of Haiti's really notorious gangs. And when the earthquake happened, the prison had been destroyed, and like hundreds of people who'd been locked up for gang activity had gotten out. And it was one of the big fears that there was like this tenuous peace after the earthquake. People were basically in survival mode, but there was this big fear that it would return to some degree of lawlessness, and it's a harbinger for the situation in Haiti right now, which is really sad. But Chris had jumped out and taken photos of that as well. And we asked people, we were there, volunteers, kids, we were in the first year of university, about 20 or 19 or something. And we were there to ostensibly to help, it's another conversation, but we were curious, we didn't know what to do exactly. And so we asked around, we didn't know how serious this was. We spoke to a lot of people. Chris asked his brother Dan Fung, who was a very prestigious photojournalist, and he was like, these photos are really amazing. He had a lot of New York Times covers. He was like, this is really a big story. This is like everyone was paying attention to Haiti at that moment. We went to the UN. They were saying, we can't tell you what to do, but for the love of God, please don't publish those photos. They're just going to create a narrative around the gangs are back, and it's going to cause a lot of violence. And Chris, who had taken the photos, was ultimately his decision, but we really workshopped it and thought about it. The decision was, do we tell the complex truth? Are we here to help? Are we here to be journalists? Are we here to be activists? And it was a conundrum, and I think we were probably well in over our heads. And at the end of the day, Chris made the decision not to publish those photos. He looked inside himself and thought, I'm not in this for my own glory. I'm not here to check things up. I'm here to help. He was here to raise funds for grassroots organizations. And I think there's something that I go back to all the time in that story. It's morally ambiguous, it's messy. Chris knew in his heart what he was here for. He went on to throw himself into being an activist, and he made so many videos about raising, about trying to advocate for a better world, and he really threw his, that was his big passion. And so I just wonder, we were learning, we were throwing ourselves into the world and trying to figure it out. And we've all changed a lot. And I look around and I just think about these last 10 years, and I think about where would he be now, and what would he be doing now? What would be different? And I just think about, I think the answer to me, especially when I come here and I look at all you guys, is like, he's here in us, in all of us. And what he's doing what we're all doing. And I feel very much like he inspired and led, and by example, a way to live your life sort of fearlessly, and led by wanting to help and through his principles. And obviously he was changing, and I think we see the progression in the footage, and we can guess at what it might be, but I just take huge solace in knowing that we all can come back together, and we all remember him, and it means something to all. I speak for myself, it means a lot to me every day. And anyway, I think that's why we're here. And so I want to hear it, but I think I'll pass it on to other people. But thank you. If anyone else wants to share.
I can share. If you all don't know me, my name's Tommy. I'm a friend of the friend group from high school. And so I first met Chris in high school, and I was thinking about like what I wanted to say. And if you all have ever been in high school, it is an objectively terrible place. And I think one of the reasons that high school is so terrible is because if you were like me, you're like constantly worried about your social standing and worried about being judged by other people and super self-conscious. And so while many of my friends and peers were in that state of like worrying about being the scapegoat, here was this kid heeling down the hallways with this like very serene smile, just being this like magical little freak kind of. And I think it's like a really heroic thing to be able to be yourself in high school. Like that's like a wild thing to do. And I was trying to think, I'm not trying to hog all the stories, but like everybody in our friend group has a story about how Chris is like radically himself. But one story that I thought of was, I actually can't remember whether it was Lowell or Justin or Jamie was arguing with Chris at our lunch table about environmentalism, and somebody was calling him out about how he's a hypocrite because he cares about these principles, but he like throws some of his lunch food away at the end of the lunch period. And so literally for the remainder of the school year, in the most impractical way that you can imagine, Chris would take his food scraps and put them in a piece of saran wrap, and then like with like, you know, like a bandana and a stick kind of situation, he would like wrap up his food. And then I personally had the distinct honor of being in like 6th period history class with Mr. Thompson, which was right after lunch. And so you'd be like in lunch listening to whatever, I don't know, John Brown or like the New Deal or something like that. And then out of the corner of my eye, there'd just be like Chris unwrapping his little bundle. And it would be like literally like orange juice sprinkles and peas and potatoes and like pieces of chocolate chip cookie all in there together. And he would just be listening to the lecture and like, just like following his principles, eating all the bundle of the saran wrap food. And he didn't do it in a way that was like, hey, look at me, or like trying to attract attention. And people definitely like looked at him with side eyes. But I just like, yeah, I don't know. I never wanted to be like Chris, but I felt like Chris made me want to be more of myself. And yeah, I think like obviously he was a champion of protecting natural spaces, and I love him for that, but I love him even more for just like being him. And that's, yeah, something that I miss, but also something that I think we all carry with us.
Okay, I could share a story that I've been thinking about. It's all right with everybody. I moved to Ithaca when I was in 3rd grade. Before that, I lived out in Dryden, and I had a very influential introduction because I was in Steve Ryan's 3rd grade class, which I think there's some participants of that class here, but Chris was in that class, and it was monumental in my memory because Steve Ryan was not just a great teacher, he was really created a little community in that class that I have very fond memories of to this day. Rocket building, a lot of drama, you know, all sorts of stuff was going on. But one of the things that also brought me closer, because I was a little bit of an outsider, was Chris and his interest in capoeira. We I got introduced to Chris, and he was like, I'm doing this crazy martial art that's like breakdance fighting. And I was like, that sounds awesome. Let's do that. And I got really close to Chris because every Wednesday night, my dad or John would organize carpools for us to go down to this little studio downtown, and we would take these capoeira lessons together from a really great instructor, and we bonded throughout that. But Chris, in classic Chris fashion, would oftentimes bend the rules of socially acceptable behavior. And this was perfectly illustrated by one night when we were at capoeira class. And capoeira is this very fluid movement. You're doing somersaults, as you saw. Chris was like pretty much a gymnast. He was like an acrobat. And he inspired me to get better in a lot of senses. But we would be doing cartwheels. We would be doing like rolls. We would be jumping over each other, throwing kicks. And oftentimes when your kick comes up in the air, it's like, you know, your foot's sort of elevated, your leg's sort of elevated. And Chris didn't wear underwear. and this happened multiple times. And our capoeira instructor, John, had to take a few moments. There was like, we would create a little circle and people would play in the center. And there was just one moment one night where like John stopped and he was like, Chris, are you wearing underwear right now? And Chris, without he didn't miss a second. He was just like, no, I'm not. And pretended like everything was perfectly normal. And I do realize it was quite a tactic because it was very distracting. Very distracting. I will always say Chris was probably a little better at capoeira than I was because he. But I will forever kind of remember that as my introduction into Ithaca and this amazing set of friends and family that I've developed here. And Chris was monumental in that. And just his movement, his ability to like strain his body and push himself to the limit, like heeling, backflips, trampoline, like he inspired me to push myself. And I still think about him a lot when I am trying to do something that I don't think I can do. So I just wanted to share that.
I remember Chris mostly when he was in middle school or like high school. That's when he was really closest. So that first video, like that's how he kind of lives in my heart. But junior year of high school, he came to me and he was like, hey, I need to record you for this video that I made. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, you're the love interest in in Roller Boy or whatever his film he made for English media. And I was like, no, you're in that class with senior boys. I will not be participating in this. And he showed me a clip and he's like, he's looking at talking to the camera and he's like making out with a sock and he's like, Emily Barker. And so I was like, I'm so sorry, I cannot do this. And he had Saoirse fill in for me, but instead of re-recording what he had already made, he just like on top of it, he was like making out with the sock and he's like, Saoirse Andrews. And just going back to what Tommy said, like, yeah, he was just never afraid of being himself, and I feel like I also share that like appreciation for him in that way, and I wish that I could have been more comfortable like being in Rollerboy because that was such an iconic film. And I wish that we still had, I mean maybe you guys do, but I wish that we could still watch that because that was just like, I feel like the highlight of high school. It is on YouTube?
Yo, sidebar though, I know we have like acclaimed directors who are like winning Emmys, but
Roller boy.
when you top roller boy, come back to that.
I think that's on YouTube, isn't it?
Yes.
Check it, it's that much part of it.
Yeah.
I wanted to share something about Chris, and we had a good group of friends. Sort of, I was introduced to him through Jamie and Alex, and they all went to elementary school with him, and we would all ski and mountain bike together, and just sort of share that. You know, I would always bike a lot of times through Cornell and get to Chris's house, and you really never knew what you would get into. It was just always so exciting. Go on the trampoline, go in the woods, and I don't really have one story in particular, but since we were talking about his like infamous Heelys and soap shoes, I remember one time we were in Cornell and he would, he would hit the rail and then he would take his soap shoes off and give them to me, and they would like stick my feet into his sweaty shoes, and then I would try to grind the rail, and just a lot of good memories of, just being with him, and that never-ending amount of energy, which led to sort of never knowing what you were going to get into.
I've got a story. So everyone's sort of seen Chris as a bit of a prankster, but actually, I had the pleasure of having him work with me as an undergraduate research assistant, and he actually had a lot of intellectual depth as well. And in my own case, after he had gone to Haiti, we had discussions about it and whether or not he was helping or hurting. And I said, if you're really serious about it, you'll commit to it. And so he went back and did some research on trying to find ways that he could really make a difference. Was that a dog? So he got into this thing about bamboo. And he thought, well, this would help with reforestation. It would bring in new sources of livelihood to the locals, stabilize soils, phytoremediation, all these things. And so they decided they were going to plant a kind of orchard of these small seedlings. And he asked me if I would design a facility to provide shade for these seedlings when they get started. And when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, the most appropriate material to use would be bamboo. And that launched a whole new source of research for me, where I was working with rapidly renewable material, working it in a way that it was designed for disassembly. And then we decided to actually make a prototype. Cornell wouldn't let us do it in Haiti, so we did it in Punta Cana. And a crew of us went down there to do the foundation work, and Chris was part of that. We worked very hard, but we always played hard. And in the end, we ended up producing a building that has now has been named for Chris. It's in Punta Cana. It's an outdoor education center for the environmental arm of the Punta Cana Foundation. Partially because of the funds that John Dennis was able to provide. But it was in his spirit that building was built. And it's still there, still being used. It survived 3 hurricanes. And it all started with Chris having this kind of wild idea. So I'd like to acknowledge the intellectual capacity and the depth of his commitment to environmental issues. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a bit of a story that piggybacks on it a little bit. So I'm Christian, for those I don't know. I was in Haiti with Chris and Tom for part of the summer, building some of those shade houses. And
as much as Chris was a deeply committed intellectual, as others have noted, deeply impractical. I have to say that navigating the process of building a physical structure with him was a nightmare. That being said, I too am a deeply unpractical person, so it was a cocktail of ineffectiveness. I, at the moment, was really frustrated, but in retrospect, it was so hilarious because he was really invested in the documentation of this process, but of course, like, we were spending like 6 to 8 hours a day digging, and he would be on the sidelines kind of looking great with his shirt off, casually filming the process, and then like the 11th hour we'd jump over and like film himself doing some shoveling. But he actually really led the project, and he built community ties, and the force of his personality was the reason why the project really came into existence. And he continued with his commitment to it long after those initial trips. It really became a vocational commitment for him. But the reason I bring it up, I guess, is because I think after he passed, at least for me, I felt like he had exited with me on the wrong foot, because I also sometimes felt dismissive of his impracticality. And as I've gotten older, I guess, what I've come to realize is that that impracticality often originated from a difference in ideology, where he was a radical and a purist, and he was fully committed, and social norms and mores were just a kind of obstacle. And we can all acknowledge that social mores and norms often are obstacles to actually doing the right thing. And he never let that get in his way. And I think as time's gone on, he's kind of become a present kind of counterpoint as I deal with decisions in my own life, where the thought of what Chris would do, even in the minutiae of day-to-day life, kind of pushes me towards doing the right thing more often than not, whether it's throwing something out or thinking about my purchasing decisions or my career choices. I always have it kind of in the back of my head that I kind of sense of what Chris would say about it, and it's become such a cherished aspect of my memory of him, because his legacy is just like continuing to live on in these small ways by kind of pushing me to do a little bit more than I would have otherwise in all these different ways. So I hope some of you feel the same way.
I have a story that feels like an example of that. And it's stuck with me. I had an iPod Shuffle back in the day, and Chris had an iPod Shuffle, and mine was broken irreparably. It was the one with the little clip on it, and the chargers for those guys it was built to only fit an iPod Shuffle with the clip. And so he needed the charger, and I really didn't need the charger. And I was stuck in the way of thinking of like, well, you know, I paid for it. And so you want to buy it from me? And it wasn't that he didn't want to pay for it. It was really just that, like, his different way of thinking, and like, you've got this thing, it's weighing you down. Wouldn't you just want to give it to me? Yeah, I actually, like, I forget if I did or not. But yeah, I hope I did.
I have a quick thing that also, Kristen, you remind me of, but when in doubt, wear a helmet. he would always have a helmet on in our house. And I was like, yeah, you never know what could happen here, you know, but I think about him every time I see somebody without a helmet, which is often on Cornell's campus. And the other one is when you brush your teeth. This is, well, Jack just left, but it kind of relates to you. Oh, okay, Jack, I think of you at the same time, because Chris always said, turn the water off when you brush your teeth. And I remember he kind of got a little frustrated about that one time. So every time I turn it off, I think of both of you. And, it's a good thing to live by. So wear the helmet, turn the water off.
Is there a clip from the Winnebago of him with the helmet on?
I know. When you guys all had to grab the helmet, I was like, well, no problem for Chris. He already had it on.
He wore his helmet the entire time that we drove across country. It was a ski
To cover
helmet.
up his hair.
What's that?
To cover up the bleach.
No. But yeah, he wore it every day, and I'd love to see the clip if you have it.
We have more clips that we can, like, sort of unedited long version that we can play with that.
No.
While driving in the car, he wore the helmet. If he was worried.
No, just Chris wore the helmet in the car.
You guys did it.
So I'll share a few thoughts about Chris. As his dad, you know, one of the things I have to ask is, geez, did I really mess up, you know, parenting? You know, did I forget to teach him certain things? And, you know, we didn't own boats, so I didn't give him the boating skills that, you know, so he went out on the canoe that morning without a bailer and maybe didn't really finish getting the water out of the boat. And, you know, so I feel a little bad about that. But looking back, you know, I think Jack Elliott and Christian Elliott really asked an interesting question. How are we living differently now, you know, having known Chris? And I'll get to that in a second, but I remember he and I did a trip. I think it was his 3rd out of 5 trips to Haiti. And he had one other friend whose name I'm forgetting, was Eric something, a big guy who played baseball. Maybe you can help me on that one. But anyway, Chris wanted to go the cheapest way possible, which involved sleeping on the floor in the Orlando airport for 6 hours. And, you know, I said, Chris, I really want to get there kind of rested. So I flew on I arrived like 6 hours later, and Chris actually met me on time at the airport. But I remember descending into Port-au-Prince and just thinking to myself, oh my God, this is what a country looks like after it's, you know, past the tipping point. There were no trees on the landscape and these terrible eroded gullies. So anyway, I say, well, Chris, what's the plan? He says, well, we're going to go out and look at the bamboo, you know, and we're going to visit this and visit that. And it was, you know, a 5-6 day trip. And I said, well, look, let's just rent a Land Rover and we'll have to have a vehicle. So, you know, we'll always have our transport. No, Dad, that's far too expensive. I've lined up a vehicle that will drive us, you know, to our first stop. And I'm thinking, oh. And then that night we actually stayed in a voodoo temple. And I remember we get into this, it's in a compound, and the owners of the compound said, yeah, you guys can stay in the temple, but do whatever you do not open any of these 3 doors. Okay, we won't open the doors. So we slept in the temple, and it was a little kind of an eerie feeling. But the next morning, we get in the rented vehicle, and we're heading off, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the place name, but we're passing lots of sugarcane fields. We're out in the country, and suddenly, you know, the engine starts kind of chugging, and the engine, like, you know, dies, and we're an hour into a 5-hour trip. And so Chris says, well, Dad, we can just hitchhike. So we did hitchhike, and eventually, you know, we got to where we were going, but this was a Chris-style trip, you know, things didn't really work out, you know, if we'd paid a lot more money and had our own vehicle, we would have gotten there sooner. But anyway, one of the things, and this is we actually met a French guy who did, he had a, gosh, what do you call it? A hang glider where he bundles you under him and you take off.
And so I said, well, guys, I better go first. So we get up and, you know, and I think, okay, this is safe. So then, and we spin around for a while, you know, maybe 100, 200 yards up. But then Eric is next and Chris is third. And somehow Chris must have persuaded this French guy to go like really high because they got up above the clouds. And I'm looking up, you know, no sight of them. I said, oh my God, we're in one of the poorest countries in the world. And, you know, what if there's an accident? Anyway, eventually they came down. So I'm not sure if that really spoke to my good parenting skills. And just to go back to Chris's first 5 years, he did go to the emergency room 5 times in the first 5 years, so he was kind of accident prone, didn't have a sense of danger. And I remember when we lived in Geneva one night, we were in the business district, it was after dark, and Chris was just barely a toddler, what, maybe 2? 1.5? And I said, you know, let's just watch him and see how far he goes. And he's running down the sidewalk in this business district, just looking around, running, and we're kind of holding back. And he must have gone for like minutes before it occurred to him to kind of look around to see whether we were following him. But anyway, so that's a bit about Chris. But, and I remember just fast forwarding to Cornell, he called me once and he said, Dad, it rained really hard last night. Would you mind coming and getting my sleeping bag and my sleeping mat? It's in a bush, you know, near Mann Library. Is it a bush? I said, yeah, it's about a 20-foot diameter bush, and I have this little room inside there, and you'll find it. So anyway, I find the bush, and I drag this bedding out, and it is just dripping. How could he have been sleeping in there? Getting that wet. So, and Chris got to know all the janitor staff at Mann Library. I mean, he really knew the kind of insides and outs because, you know, he said, why should I go home if I can just, you know, work in the library, go out, catch 4 hours of sleep, go back. He had that intensity. Sometimes he would shoot, he would interview someone about, you know, Hugo Lake or something, and then that night he would just stay up all night editing it and have a finished version. And so after Chris died, I thought, well, I've got to do some of the things that he wanted to do. So I bought this nice camera, a nicer one than he, video camera, and I filmed like a protest in Albany. I filmed this, I filmed that, but I didn't have the editorial skills. I just couldn't power through, you know. And what was it, Premiere? Anyway, so I gave the camera to Alex and Will, and they, you know, they're very modest, but they made a video called The Territory in the Amazon about, you know, a local indigenous group, the Uruwawe, you know, defending their land, and they taught them how to use video. So Chris really, I think, and Don Funk kind of got a media group going, but I decided I didn't have the skills because I suddenly realized how driven and how quick thinking you have to be able to edit video. So anyway, Alex and Will, thank you for carrying on that wonderful tradition. So we could go for the lakeside walk if there's not another story, because the spring rolls are waiting and some other food. Can't be here all night. What do you think, Alex and Will?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, we don't have to like be formal about it and keep telling stories. Don't even go walk and.
Or you can stay here and start eating.
Yeah, those of us who want to go out, it's a beautiful day.